Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm sat across from a man who makes AI question its own intelligence. That's right, friends, the FOMO Navy SEAL, Garrett Unkelbach, the anomaly that no algorithm could account for. You- That's like a Neo-esque
It
type
is,
of
it
intro,
is a
right?
Neo. It is a Neo reference because he is the anomaly.
Yeah, and there you go. Your interactions with AI one day, could be something that changes the future of humanity. Who knows? Anyways, so it's our Thursday. It's our Thursday release episode, G, and we are looking at. I was talking to Garrett, and I'll just give you the background on this. We're doing something a little bit different. For those of you who have listened to the podcast for a while, you've seen me change. I mean, I would say, fortunately or unfortunately, Garrett, we have a lot of new listeners, and I can see the stats. There's a lot of people going back to episode 1, and
It's
like I said,
great.
every month, yeah, it's awesome. Until I get to episode 4 and get to hear me in the ice bath, it's like permanently keeping me humble right now. Which, praise God, I need that. But one of the things, so you see me change on this podcast, but like one of the things that I think has been a massive lid lifter for me is you sharing, like, it's the conversations we have when it's just me and you. And it's not, unfortunately, it's not something that's I can predict. It's always when we're doing something else that it'll just kind of come up, and like you'll say some things and I'll be like, And so you've been a lid lifter for me in a lot of the ways that I think that has
You've
had a
gotten to see how I respond to certain things.
yeah, that probably is it. Is things will come up organically, and I'm like, why'd you do that? Because I'm a learner. I pay attention, right? And you've been clear with me. And a lot of times when you say things, I'll think about it and I'll kind of weigh it up, and I'm like, okay, I get that. And then I look at the consequences or the knock on effects of thinking that way, and I'm like, yeah. And so I've adopted a lot of those things. So what I want to do is to bring some of, I call them Garrett's opinions, but I wanted to bring some of your like lid lifters.
It's gonna be my hot takes, is what it is.
No, no. The hot takes podcast will be one day whenever Lindsay like branches off and like starts her own podcast to just like get it out into the world, and she'll bring you on. So it's definitely not hot takes. These are well thought out takes. How's that? So yeah. So the point is, we're going to be sharing some of these things with you. I will tell you, um, if they're done correctly, and they will be, they're going to force you to think, and that's what we want. We want to challenge a lot of what's normal, and that's really, I mean, you say you're an Oz Defier, Chaos Navigator, and you're a challenger by definition. Like you're God wired you to push back. I talk about it all the time. Your natural reaction if something pushes on you, whether it's good or bad, is I'm going to push back first before I decide and discern whether this is good, and then I'll come back to you. And I
Yeah,
think that in a lot of ways that helps you with some of these things. So, anyways. So this first one that we're going to cover, and like I said, I don't know whether to call this the Garrett Opinion
yeah.
series or whatever.
I this is a hot take, but it's a legitimate take. And what Nick was saying before we started is he said, one of the things I appreciate about you, but also is really frustrating when I have to argue with you, is that your opinions are always really well thought out. I don't.
Yeah,
I won't share my opinion if it's not something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
which is contrary to most people, because most people will throw an opinion out there and you can unravel it in one question. And I said to G, I was like, the only thing I've ever just immediately trashed him back on was he told me one time I needed to change my signature. And I was just like, okay, hang
I
on,
just
man.
said
And I'm sure.
I thought it could be better. I didn't think it was the best representation of you. I still hold that opinion.
Oh, shocker. You stuck to your guns. Well, anyways, that was a fun one. And this was as I was signing our purpose blueprint for the company we started and co-owned together. So he was telling me how awful my signature is as I put it on something that's like permanently linked to us. But anyways, that was one that I rejected. But there's been so many other ones where I'm like, okay, I have to think about that. And I'm like, actually, you know what, man? And he'll give you the backup for it. So anyways, so the opinion for today is that he said to me a while back, and we've discussed it at length since, is you shouldn't be vulnerable with your wife. You should be transparent,
It's
which
it,
is
it's really common in culture today. You hear people talk about that, like vulnerability. Vulnerability is so important. You need to have
Mhm.
vulnerability, and people think they should have vulnerability with their wife. And I vehemently disagree. I think you should be completely transparent with your wife. So let me give just like the definitions of those things.
Yeah.
Uh, Vulnerability, like the actual definition of vulnerable, is it comes from the Latin word vulnero, which means to wound. And the definition of vulnerable is susceptible to wound or injury. The definition of transparent is that you can see all the way through it, that everything's visible, that you're not hiding anything. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what you should be with your wife. You shouldn't hide things from your wife. But I do not need to make myself And it's not like making myself susceptible to injury with my wife, but it's more so trying to share the pain of things. Like, here, like, see my wound, feel my wound with me. That's what vulnerability is, and it's not what you should be with your wife. Like,
Mm,
literal example, before Lindsay and I were married, when we were just right before we got engaged. Yeah, it was right before we got engaged. I had knee surgery, and was not fun. I tore my patellar tendon. They had to reattach it. It's a serious knee surgery. My wife knew what happened to me. She saw the scar. I explained to her an understanding of what had happened, but my wife, did not want to see the video of my surgery. She did not
right.
want to feel and see the extent of my wounds. And now some women appreciate surgery videos. That's not the point that I'm making. That's a metaphorical example of, it's okay to talk to your wife about, hey, here's what I'm going through, right? Explain what's going on, but do not try to get your wife to feel the pain that you're feeling, or
Right.
under, like, you need to know how hard it is for me. I
Yeah.
have been through like incredibly difficult situations, and that have like tested me to my core. And I've just told my wife, like, hey, I just need you to be patient with me in this season. This is a difficult season for me. That's been our
Right.
conversation about it. Right. And if she asks for a little bit more color, I'll tell her. I said, well, it's related to this, or it's because of this situation, and I'm carrying a lot there. And that's really like the depth of our conversation. I have other men in my life. I have mentors in my life that I'll go to for some vulnerability. I'll have vulnerability with other men. I have vulnerability with my mentors. Right.
Hmm.
Transparency is a great quality of leadership. Vulnerability is not. Right. As a leader, it is my job to lead, and as a leader, it's my job to carry a level of weight. And so again, I can be transparent. I'm not going to be withholding from the people that I'm leading, but I'm also not going to go to the people that I'm leading like, man, it's just really hard for me today. Can
Right.
you help me? Right? No,
Yeah.
that's my job, is to withstand that pain and help equip the people that I'm leading to be able to do their jobs and raise them up. And if I can't do that, I shouldn't be leading.
So you see that as, because some people would say like, oh, well, you're being fake, if you're covering that up. But what you're saying is, if you're trying to shirk your responsibility, if you're saying, hey, you need to
It's
pity me, or like,
it's been normalized, but we live in it. Like, I don't think many people would argue this with me. That, yet one, not that it's been normalized, but I don't think many people would argue with me that we live in a feminized society. Our,
right.
our society has been feminized. We have feminism is a part of that, and men have been allowed to grow soft. And in this
Yeah.
culture that we live in is also the conversation of, well, you should share your pain with your wife, and I don't agree
Yeah.
at all.
Right. And I mean, and that is the truth. I mean, so I was looking this up. The amazing thing about research is you can look at all this stuff. And I mean, one of the, like, very easily, I should say, research, the amazing thing about research, the amazing thing about AI now is it makes it very easy to show how things have shifted. And, it's shifted from stoicism to emotional honesty. This is like chat GPT. I just said, like, talk to me about vulnerability in relationships and what pop culture has to say about it. And they say that it's like vulnerability in a relationship is a sign of strength, authenticity, and intimacy. And it talks about how for men, it's shifted from stoicism to emotional honesty, where once like stoic, emotionally guarded characters were idealized, like James Bond. Now there's a move towards emotionally and what they call intelligent male leads. And they give some examples from shows I've never watched, so I don't really know. I can't really use those. But they're saying that vulnerability is no longer gendered, it's a shared emotional responsibility, and that the pop culture message is love without vulnerability is shallow. Real love requires risk. And so they talk about like rom-coms and all this different stuff about like, how you need to share everything. And it brings up language like the therapy culture that has taken over in mainstream media, so that things like safe space, emotional labor, holding space and boundaries and all this sort of stuff are regularly thrown around. And they've tried to make that out to be like, hey, that's, you don't have a deep relationship if you're not just like falling apart and to your partner. And you're coming in saying, hang on, that completely throws out the roles and responsibilities designed by God for a man and woman to come together and say like, no, I'm the leader, I'm supposed to be strong, God made me to be strong, so there's some things that I'm going to carry weight so you never have to. And that flies completely in the face of what culture says.
The
And as
one of the things that made me want to join the military was, I thought about some of the women in my life that I cared deeply about. Some wonderful, sweet women. And by the time I was 18, I knew that I was different. And I thought
Mhm.
about some of the wonderful, sweet women in my life, and that they were not capable of being exposed to some of the things that I knew I was capable of.
Right.
I knew that being around extreme violence, that going through horrendous situations would not bother me. I knew that about myself at 18 years old, and I knew about some of these women that I cared deeply about, that some of the things that God had created me to have the ability to withstand would absolutely break them and ruin them. Because
Right.
there are things like that. Um, I would say like extreme violence and some of the horrors of war, it can ruin people, right? Like they don't
Mhm.
recover from it. And I knew that God had given me a capacity to deal with some of those things. And I thought about these women in my life that said, I want to go and fight this and face this so that they would never have to. And I
Right.
can't do that with everything, but that was a specific uh, facet of life and humanity that I said, I can confront this and deal with this so that some of the people that I care about don't have to. And you know
Right.
what? My sister is one of the most wonderful, loving, sweet, forgiving people, and my sister has a level of compassion that I don't share. And
Mhm.
that's not that I'm not a compassionate person. My sister is special in that way. I see her that way. I think she's extremely compassionate, and so she has an ability to carry weights that I can't carry. I
Mhm.
think this is
Mhm.
this example that I'm talking about today is men's goal and should not be in their marriages like, I want my wife to feel the pain that I feel. No, God made you
Right.
to deal with pain that your wife isn't supposed to deal with.
Yeah. So in that, I want to give a practical like example, but I also want to go back to the example that you gave. Um, you talked about, so like when you were going through something, you said to Lindsay, "Hey, I need you to pray for me. Like this is how you can support me. And if she asks questions, you just answer them, whatever." Like, and you were meanwhile you were talking to brothers, you were talking to mentors. You're obviously crying out to God. I mean, we read the whole of the Psalms where you see how vulnerable David is with God in like really just being open and honest about those things. So
That's
does
a
that
go ahead. What's your question?
No, I was just gonna say, like, so what was the conclusion? Like, whenever, like, how did you deal with like, close the story loop? You were going through something hard. You said you needed to pray. Did you then, like, figure it out and come back to her? Or how did you, like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, what I needed was vulnerability with God. Right.
Right.
I didn't need my wife to validate my pain. I need because of what I was going through. Because this is what I understand is that everything that God's allowed me to go through is for my maturity. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily some of the stuff that God's put me through isn't a weight that my wife is supposed to carry. Now my wife loves me, supports me, cares deeply about me, and doesn't want, she wants to know that I'm going through stuff. And so
Right.
I'll tell her, but I don't need to try to give my pain to her. I need to give my pain to the Lord. I need to be vulnerable with the Lord about, here's what I'm afraid of, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what I feel like is too hard for me. Talk to God about those things.
Mhm.
Like deeply, and say,
Yeah.
God, I need you to help me with this. This is where I'm struggling. And it's not that I can't tell my wife like, hey, I'm in a situation right now where I don't know what to do, but I'm not going to ask my wife to jump in and like, hey, I need you to carry this weight with me. I'm going to ask my wife to pray for wisdom for me.
Now, see, I think what's so interesting about that, because you see that all the time, women are incredibly nurturing, and if a man drops the ball, as much as I hate saying this, women will step up. I would say 99 times out of 100. That's why we have so many fatherless homes in America, because it's like a guy will drop his responsibility, but man, the woman will step in. And I could think that from a place of a good natured desire, a man, if he doesn't have this belief, I'm made to bear up under pain and difficulty and weight, and God made me to be strong, and so like I don't need to like pass this off, I need to bear it. You could share that, and then your wife from a loving position could be like, hey, we need to figure this out, like, and almost interfere with your own growth and maturation process, not even realizing what she's doing.
The data is so overwhelming on this, people just want to deny it. What is so often talked about and as one of the epidemics in our society is the epidemic of fatherless homes.
Yeah.
Now, what's happening in fatherless homes? Are children dying of starvation? Are they, never growing out of adulthood? Are they dying as children? No, great women are great caretakers. But the
Mhm.
epidemic of fatherless homes is people not maturing into adulthood. And that's
Yeah.
because men have a role that they're supposed to play in their children's lives. And when they don't play it, these children become adults, but they never become mature adults. And the
Yeah.
same is true, like the point, like if the same is true for men, a man can raise children without a wife, but those children won't be loved and nurtured properly, and they probably actually will miss some meals because men do that. Women will make sure their kids don't miss any meals. Men raise
Right.
their kids themselves. The kids probably miss a few meals, but
Yeah.
they'll be tough.
Right.
I say this to say we're supposed to play different roles. And if at any point one of us is playing the other person's role, you're going to be poor at both of your roles.
Mm, very good. So, with that belief, right, that you're made to be strong, that you have a specific role, and that as the leader, it's not your job to transfer your pain or pass it off, and to have that warrior's mindset, because you talked about it's like, hey, I would never want you to go through this because I know I'm made to. Let's put this into a practical application, and we can wrap up unless you have anything else, G. So, like a very common one, you're going through a tough time as a man. Let's say you're out of a job, finances are tight, so doubt is knocking at your doorstep, and like I think for a lot of guys, it's like this is where they break down, and it's like, they're all over the place for whatever reason, whatever this is tapping into their identity. Like, what would you say to that man? Like, okay, you
I would
what you want to
say
do is break down, but how should you handle like
it's just like the situation. I don't know if this has happened with you. It may happen, it may not. But it's like, how old's Elijah? Elijah 6, or is he still
he's
5?
5? Yeah.
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 Be like in a baseball game if Elijah starts crying during the baseball game. What your wife is going to want to do is hug him, and he's upset, and he's having a hard time. And what you're going to say is, you need to stop crying and get out there and play the game.
Right.
Right? You're going to give a different feedback to
Yeah,
him.
100% I am. Yeah.
Right? Because hey, you're okay. You're just having an
Right.
emotional breakdown right now. Stop it. Right? You're upset about
Yeah.
stuff that you don't need to be upset about. You're more than capable. Get back out there and play. And I would say the
Right.
exact same thing to a man who can't find a job, or whatever your struggle is that you're ready to break down to your wife about. If you had a father, he would say, "Why are you crying to your mom? Your
Mm,
wife is not your mom." He'd say,
yeah.
You're capable. You need to get back out there, and you need to do what you're supposed to do." If you're in that situation, that's where you need other men in your life. Be like, dude,
Yeah.
I'm like broke and busted, and I don't know what to do. And that's where you
Yeah.
having other strong men in your life can speak into you and encourage you. You can be transparent with your wife, but what you need to be saying to your wife is, I don't know where I'm going to find the next dollar. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to get out. I'm trusting God. I'm going to get out there and do everything that I can do. Please pray for me. If I get
Man,
home early tonight, it's because I found a job.
I love that analogy because it highlights something that we often forget. And
Well,
you're exactly,
let me just wrap
yeah,
up that point before you go on. What the reason that men break, and this is what is going to be. I don't intend for it to be hurtful, but it'll be hurtful and offensive to men who have done this. When you're crying to your wife, it's because you want out of the game.
yeah,
If your son went and cried to Rhiannon because he wants out of the baseball game, he doesn't want to
yeah,
play anymore. And if you're
yeah,
crying to your wife, it's because you want out of the game, and that
yeah.
is
You
a
want someone to
horrible.
validate your pain. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm just. I can't do it. I'm not going to make it. You're asking to quit when you go and cry to your wife, and that should never be your attitude as a man, as a husband, or as a father.
Yeah. Now, what I love about that analogy, man, and I think it's so good, is the reason because you're exactly right. When Elijah does it, now Rena and I have agreed on this, and she will hug him, but she will say it's absolutely not an option. We don't quit, right? We're surfaces, and so, but you're absolutely right. And the reason that I can be what some people might consider harsh with him is exactly what you said. Because I look at it and I'm zoomed out. I'm like, if you start quitting on something as simple as baseball now because you didn't feel like it, what else are you going to quit on? And
Right.
that's what I think people miss out on this when they're like, no, but I need to be able to just have this moment, this tantrum or breakdown, or I need to just share everything. And it's like, no, but like, do you think life is getting easier or harder for you? Because like you're not going to grow and mature if like something as simple in my son's case as a baseball game breaks down. You might to you at the time, your financial difficulty might be the hardest thing you've ever faced. But you know what? God's looking at you zoomed out, going like, son, I made you for so much more.
One of the things I despised in the Navy that special operations culture despised was what they would call a training timeout. The
Mm,
military invented this recently, this thing called a training timeout, to where like, training is getting too hard for me. I need to call timeout. And special operations culture, they said the only thing that you can call a safety timeout if you think there's a safety violation. We're not ever going to call training timeouts because you're uncomfortable.
yeah.
And that's what to me that's what holding space is. I need a pause. I need. I'm
Hmm.
not. I can't move forward. I'm not ready to keep growing. What if the trees in your backyard just said, I need to take a training time out for a couple of years. This whole just like pulling water out of the ground and soaking up sun all day long. It's really hard for me. And
Mm,
it can sound like I'm treating people's pain as petty, and I'm not. What I'm saying is that you were designed. A tree is designed to grow. If a tree pauses, it's walking away from its purpose. A tree's purpose is to absorb water out of the ground, absorb sun, and to grow. And when you're calling a training time out on your life, you're calling a training time out on your purpose. You're calling a training time out
mm.
on your growth. It's supposed to be hard, but it's also what you're designed for, and you're capable of it. So it's fear, and it's so many other things that keep us from the growth that God has for us.